Hello friends, myself Ketan M. Patel from Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Technical Education and Research Center, Navsari. Department is Electrical Engineering Department. Okay, and subject is Disaster Management. Third year, 5th semester. Okay. Here, this is a flow of content. First is disaster risk management, then disaster risk and what is disaster risk reduction, how do we reduce risk, public awareness, basic principle of public awareness programs, disaster risk assessment process, etc. Okay, first disaster risk management. Okay, what is disaster risk management? When a hazard event such as a flood, cyclone, earthquake or tsunami occurs, triggering a loss of life and damage to infrastructure, it highlights the reality that society. When discussing disaster risk management, a disaster can highlight the following in a community. This geographical area where the community is settled is exposed to such a hazard. The society and its infrastructure and other processes as well as services which may have experienced damage or destruction. Okay, so disaster risk management is a one type of probability of harmful consequence or expected losses, okay, like a death, injuries, property, livelihoods, economic activity or environmental damage resulting from interaction between the natural or human induced hazards, and vulnerable condition is known as risk. Okay, it is a combination of the probability of an event and its negative consequence. Conventionally, risk is expressed by the notation is risk is equal to hazard into vulnerability. Okay, risk is a measure of the expected losses due to hazard event occurring in a given area over a specified time period. The level of risk depend upon the first is nature of the hazard, second vulnerability of the element which are affected, and third one is economic value of those elements. Okay. Now, what is risk management? The systematic approach and practice of managing uncertainty to minimize potential harm and loss is called risk management. Okay. Now, what is disaster risk reduction? The concept and practice of reducing disaster risk through systematic efforts to analyze and manage the cause factors of disasters, including through reduced exposure to hazards. Okay. In disaster risk reduction consists of the following three main components. First is disaster risk analysis, second disaster risk prevention, and third one is disaster preparedness. Okay. Next, public awareness. Okay, what is public awareness in risk reduction? Okay, and its importance. First is public awareness as a primary element of risk reduction. Second is national public awareness initiatives, special international events and major activities, the important role of the media, local community experience promotes public awareness, local relevance, community experience and traditional knowledge. Okay. In public awareness can be created by the teaching disaster management subject at school as well as college level, arranging seminars and workshops on disaster risk reduction through training programs on television and radios, publishing do's and don'ts during disaster, involving people in the disaster management program, literate people about possible risks of disasters, arranging mock drill for rescue operation, involving local bodies, NGOs in the disaster management programs. Okay. Now, basic principle of public awareness program. They should be designed and implemented with a clear understanding of local perspectives and requirements, which all materials reflecting local condition. They should target all sections of society, including decision makers, educators, professionals, members of the public, and individual living communities. Different type of messages, location, and delivery systems are necessary to reach the various target audience. Okay, so basic principle of public awareness is depend upon the risk reduction. Okay, so the public awareness is helpful in risk reduction. The following ways: first is awareness about building construction. People should be aware of good quality construction. First is earthquake resistance construction. That failure of infrastructure during earthquake can be prevented, like good quality materials, good workmanship, compliances of highest codes, following building by cows, use of skilled masons, with definitely minimize the risk of hazard. Second is awareness about environment. The awareness of society about the conservation of environment will also reduce the hazard, like afforestation, soil conservation, saving water, less use of petroleum products, etc. will help in minimizing the risk. Third one is awareness about agriculture. Okay, awareness among rural farmers about the following will reduce the risk of hazard. Use of organic fertilizers instead of chemical fertilizers. Second is minimum use of pesticides, sprinkle or drip irrigations, and control grazings, etc. Fourth one is awareness about various disasters and their effects. The community should be aware of the various types of hazards, their effects and mitigation measures. For example, during earthquake, people should keep emergency kit ready. They should identify safe place for shelters. They should stand in open away from buildings. During heavy rains, they should move and higher places to survive from floods. Okay, so public awareness is a most important in management. Now, disaster risk and what is disaster risk reduction? According to terminology of UNDRR, disaster risk is defined as the potential loss of life, injury or destroyed or damaged assets which could occur to a system, society or a community in a specific period of time, determined as a function of hazard, exposure and capacity. Okay, in the technical sense, it is defined through the combination of three terms: hazard, exposure and vulnerability. Historically, dealing with disasters focused on emergency response, but towards the end of the 20th century, it was increasingly recognized that disasters are not a natural, and that is only by reducing and managing conditions of hazard, exposure and vulnerability that we can prevent losses of disasters. Okay, so by these factor we can increasing or decreasing by man or naturally. Okay, in disaster risk assessment process, disaster risk assessment process is a process to determine the nature and extent of such a risk by analyzing hazards and evaluating existing conditions of vulnerability that together could potentially harm exposed people, property, services, livelihoods, and the environmental on which they depend. The steps in risk management is first is hazard assessment, second is vulnerability assessments, third is capacity assessment, and four is people's perception of risk. Now, how do we reduce risk? First is preventions, activities and measures to avoid existing and new disaster risk, often less costly than disaster relief and response. For instance, reclosing exposed people and assist away from hazard area. Second is transfer, the process of formally or informally shifting the financial consequence of particular risk from one party to another, whereby a household community, enterprise, or state authority will obtain resources from the other party after occurs in exchange for ongoing or compensatory social or financial benefits provided to the other party, for instance insurance. Third one is preparedness, the knowledge and capacities of governments, professional response and recovery organization, communities and individuals to effectively anticipate, respond to and recover from the impacts of likely imminent or current hazard events or conditions. For instance, installing early warning systems, identifying evacuation routes and preparing emergency supplies. Okay. In preparedness, it is important for which enable governments, communities and individuals to respond rapidly to disaster situations, to cope with them effectively. Okay. Preparedness therefore encompasses those measures taken before a disaster event which are aimed at minimizing loss of life, disruption of critical services and damage when the disasters occurs. Okay. Next is mitigations, the lessening or limitation of the adverse impacts of hazards and related disasters. For instance, constructing flood defenses, planting trees to stabilize slopes and implementing strict land use and building construction codes. The mitigation emphasizes measures taken to reduce both of the effect of the hazard and the vulnerable conditions to it in order to reduce the scale of the further disasters. Okay. So this type of factors we can reduce the risk. Okay. These are the GTU paper questions. Okay, for your exam preparations. Thank you.